Alright, what's up you guys? This is Devin from CenturyFX Studios, and today we're going to be talking about Nikon's full-frame mirrorless cameras. Now, I already have a video about Canon's new full-frame camera. It is the R series, or the EOS R, with the, I think, RF mount they're coming out with 3 different adapters, so on and so forth. Well, this is Nikon's 2 new mirrorless full-frame bodies. Now, I think Nikon needed 2 full-frame mirrorless bodies to kind of compensate for the fact that Canon had one APS-C size mirrorless body that was decently successful, whereas Nikon in the past only had like the Nikon 1 and it wasn't that successful. So them coming out with 2 new mirrorless full frame bodies really helped them out. I like how they went from 45 to 24, but we're gonna get right into those specs right now. The Z7 is the big daddy, the 45 megapixel sensor full frame camera, equivalent to the D810. Well, Nikon advertises it as a mirrorless D810. I've heard photographers who posted their videos about the Z7 that it's not really like the full frame D810 or D850. It's not as equivalent, but let's get into some more specs. We got the XP6 processor. I'm pretty sure that's good enough for anything that it's doing. Mind you that no longer is it just processing images that come through and the optical, viewfinder is showing you what you're getting, but it's also processing and showing you at the same time with the same processor. So it's going to be a lot more processor heavy. So the more frames a second is going to weigh on this XP6 processor. Now, I'm not a primary Nikon shooter, I'm a primary Canon shooter, but if they have an XP6 processor in the D810, and the D810 does not have to show you an image with the same processor as it's processing the images with, because everything is digital on the mirrorless camera, then you might think that this camera might have a little bit tougher of a time if this is the exact same processor that they had in the last generation D850. So that's something to think about. That's something to put into your memory banks, because buffering is a big problem on any high-speed, high-resolution camera. So if it's a 50 megapixel 5DSR and it shoots 5 frames a second, it's going to have trouble showing you the image after it takes its burst. So those are some of the things to think about when you think about processor and processing speed. Now, I know there's a couple of different cameras that I know had an issue with that, but this camera may have an issue with processing speed because Canon and Nikon are trying to jump into the mirrorless race. They're coming in late and they're trying to match the speed of their old optical viewfinder cameras that didn't have to put so much processing speed or processing power into showing you the image. Now they have to put a whole bunch of processing power into showing you the image. So the old XP6 processor, if it's an old one, I'm not sure, I'm not a Nikon shooter, but it might have some trouble keeping up even if it's a new one. It has they have new S lenses. I guess that works. Nikon next to Canon is probably one of the biggest lens creators out there as far as cameras are concerned. So this helps. The fact that they don't have a lot of lenses as much as Canon. They probably have a lot of lenses in reference to everybody else, but as far as Canon is concerned and cameras, they're not the leading mecca. So it helps them to have more lenses on the market. I don't think of this as a positive or a negative. It helps Nikon, but in the grand scheme of things, it's all about this body and are people willing to convert to get these lenses, and that's going to be dictated by the body and these next specs that I'm going to talk about. 493 phase detection autofocus points. I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is a good thing, considering that Canon had like 5,000 autofocus points in their camera. And the reason being is because if you're a portrait photographer or anybody who needs to manually move one focus point to get precise focus, a lot of reasons why you get a full frame camera is to get precise focus, bokeh, and an accurate focus on what you want. Full frame cameras have shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field means that whatever's not in focus is really not in focus. If it's at 2.8, 1.8, 1.2, and this is the reason, one of the main reasons why you get a full frame camera, to get that background blur. But if you're not able to focus in time because you have 500 or 493 phase detection points, this might not be a good thing. But if they have implemented a new focusing system to go along with this 493 points, then you're able to get maybe a zone system where you can use a whole bunch of them, or track some kind of way, because I know they don't have eye tracking autofocus in this camera, so it kind of counteracts itself if you need a pinpoint place to focus on. You have to go all the way around the screen and all these focus points, because the focus points are all around the screen, just like the D850. I believe the D850 has the focus points at close to all around the screen. So with this new update, you're talking about focus points all around the screen, missing focus potentially, not being able to get to it because you're trying to use a small joystick, because it's a small camera at the end of the day. And I don't even think they have a small joystick. They probably have like a small D-pad on this camera because they don't want to waste a lot of space, because mirrorless cameras are about form factor. So those are a whole bunch of things to think about when it comes to the 493 autofocus points. 5-axis image stabilization. This is one of the big contenders that kept Sony relevant and popular. If Sony, the Alpha series, if they would have came out with just high megapixel cameras that were full frame, it would have been good, but it wouldn't really take people away from DSLRs like their 5-axis image stabilization has. Now, Nikon gets a lot of sensor technology from Sony, so it wasn't, I don't think it was a big enough leap for Nikon not to do this. They were able to do this, I think, with ease, whereas Canon did not do that in their new mirrorless full-frame camera. They don't have 5-axis image stabilization, and some of their new mirrorless lenses for their full-frame camera does not have stabilization. Some of them do, some of them don't, but at the end of the day, that's a win for Nikon and a thumbs down for Canon. Not being able to have internal image stabilization in your camera doesn't add value to your old lenses, and it doesn't add to your shutter speed. If you have image stabilization, you're able to keep your images nice and tight. You're able to keep your images nice, still, and you, at the end of the day, get more image quality out of your camera just by those couple of stops of image stabilization. I don't know specifically, especially since I don't have this camera in my hand, how many stops of stabilization you get out of this camera, but 5-axis is already real good technology with Sony. I've heard rave reviews about it, and I'm thinking this is close to similar. Alright, the tilting touchscreen is not as good as Canon. Canon has Nikon beat right here because they're coming out with these swivel touchscreens where you can flip it around and see it from the side. You might not think of this as a big thing, but if you're a vlogger and you need to see yourself, like I'm seeing myself right now on the 80D, and the 80D is an under $1,000 camera, and it has a swivel flip screen. I believe it's under $1,000 at this point, but Canon has had this in the 6D Mark II, and maybe not in the 5D Mark IV and their 1DX Mark II, and I get frustrated just thinking about it. But with all that being said, you have a camera that you can have full mobility of the screen over, and that's what people are looking for, especially since Panasonic has the technology too to be able to swivel the screen and whatever. I think that if you're a camera manufacturer and you go a certain way with a certain type of product or a certain type of technology in your camera, you probably have to stay the same way because it's cheaper for you, since you've probably ordered all this stuff in advance to keep in your cameras, like that swivel touch screen that Nikon and Sony have. And I don't think it's as good as the Canons, and that's one of the main reasons why I like Canon over Sony and Nikon, is because that swivel touchscreen, I'm so used to it at this point that I don't even want to go to Sony if I know I'm just going to get a slide down screen and flip out whatever it does, but it doesn't flip out like Canon. And on another side note, if you're using gimbals nowadays and things that need you to be able to balance your camera, well, what if I need to see a reference of the screen on another side to help balance a gimbal? I've had some experience with this recently. I'm going to tell you guys about my new gimbal, but having the screen out and being able to maneuver it in a way that you can actually use it and balance it on a gimbal is first class. And Canon already had that technology out before gimbal, 3-axis gimbal really became popular. So those are some of the things to think about when you're getting a flip out screen. Weather resistant, I'm sure this thing can last up to whatever the D850 could. 9 frames a second, that's great considering that Canon couldn't hack 8 frames a second in autofocus. So it's definitely a good upgrade for Nikon to be able to have 9 frames a second. But what does that 9 frames a second mean? Remember what I told you about that XP 6 processor? Well, that XP 6 processor has to be able to process not only the huge 45.7 megapixel files, but it also has to show you a screen in the eyepiece and then show you a screen in live view, the little back screen. It has a lot of daggone processing to do, so I'm curious to know what the buffer life is on this thing. How many shots can you get before the buffer goes out? All that kind of stuff. XQD card slot, only one. What? Okay, XQD is, I mean, it's there. It's a thing. It's in the D5. It's in the 1DX Mark II, or Canon's version, which is the CFast card. But these new cards, the CFast and the XQD card, they are not something that everybody has. And I understand that this camera is geared towards the professionals, the top end professionals, because it's what was $3,400 essentially what it is, but it's 5D range as far as retail value. But I can't imagine a lot of people wanting just one XQD card slot. If you had two card slots, you probably put two SDs. If you had two card slots and you wanted to have an XQD card slot, that would be great, because you have the option, even if you don't have an XQD card, to actually use an SD card in its stead. But I don't understand why just one XQD card slot, because the XQD card is going to it's going to amplify the price of this camera quite a bit, because you want to use the 4K, you want to use the highest, you know, quality available in that camera, the biggest file size, the biggest raw, uncompressed, all this other stuff, and they give you one XQD card slot, which means you're not only going to have to buy an XQD card, but you're going to have to buy a pretty fast one. Well, all of them are pretty fast, but the whole point of it, you're going to have a lot of memory trucking through this new camera, which you would have to not only change maybe even lenses, but a mount, and then you got to buy cards just to take your first pictures with this lens. And it becomes more than a $3,400 camera at this point. It becomes closer to the $4,000 range, the 4.5 grand range. So I don't like that. I don't like that right out of the bat we gotta buy a whole bunch. We have to upgrade the entire system. I like when camera manufacturers baby us into the system, so we have one SD card, one CFast card, or one SD card, one XQD card slot, because we can still use some of the old stuff while transitioning into the newer systems. SD card has been the mainstay for a while now. CF cards came in and they phased out. And a lot of photographers know that with all these things coming to the market, they know that some things will be phased in and phased out really quickly. And sometimes card formats do. Ask Sony and their dual memory disc dual whatever that thing is. They only use it in Sony cameras now. And Sony is trying to put it in their Alpha series. And I don't think it's working out all that great for the sales. So they always have dual card slots, so you're able to use another card that you might want. I wonder if one of the Sony full frame cameras have dual card slots, and if so, why couldn't Canon and Nikon do it? That's another thing. Wi-Fi, we're not even going to talk about that. It's probably going to be good, if not great. SnapRidge has been out for a while, so they've been able to upgrade it. Bluetooth as well. Connectivity with things is for the future, but at the same time, you know, Instagram and all these apps and stuff like that are still not communicating directly with our cameras like our cell phones are. So there's that drawback. But at the same time, if you wanted to just offload it to your computer, it's probably easier than it was before, or send it somewhere like Lightroom Mobile, probably easier than it was before. You have 4K UHD, that's great. No problems there. I believe it's full frame, and that beats the don't quote me on this, but I think it's full frame, because the D850 was full frame, and Nikon doesn't have room to budge on whether they're going to give their fans and their purchasers, their customers, anything like Canon can. So Canon came out with a 1.7 crop on their new full frame mirrorless camera, which is the EOS R, which I'm kind of upset about, but at the same time, you can get a wide lens and get a little bit of a better result out of it, but you still have to compensate for something that Canon did. So with that being said, 4K UHD, 10-bit, and N-Log, all these are great things, because it shows that they're caring about the customers. Even though their autofocus and video is probably not going to be as good as Canon's, they are focusing on video makers, and they're saying, despite our flaws, we're focusing on video makers, along with focus peaking and zebras and HD at 1020 at 120 frames a second. So all these things wrapped up in one. This is shaping out to be a nice camera for vloggers. Maybe not better than Canon's, even though Canon has a 1.7x crop, because Canon still has some more intangibles on their side, like dual pixel autofocus, and you know, all these things that you can do to help your video out. They may not have focus peaking, they may not have zebras, and there's a couple of things that Canon lacks on the Nikon side as far as the Z7 is concerned. But their mirrorless camera is still a contender based off of some of the things that they have. So Nikon is still gonna have to watch out, even though they have two cameras. By the way, the Z6 is not all that different from the Z7. the main differences, I think, in my opinion, if I was shooting, is the 24.5 megapixel sensor. That's close to you know, the 80D and all the other $2,000 level cameras. Seems about right. It's close to the A7 III. Also, if not past the A7 III. But also, it has a 273 autofocus point system, which seems a little bit more easier for me to manage, and I feel like I'm gonna get more shots in focus than the one that's 493 on the Z7. So, and 12 frames a second. So that's like a portable or a mirrorless D500. I think this is the better camera, to be honest with you. And you might be saying, why do you think the 24.5 megapixel camera, the Z6, is better than Z7? Isn't the Z7 better on the page? Yes, it's better on the page, but at the same time, user friendly, I think the 24.5 megapixel Z6 would be a better camera. It competes for Nikon. It has a better price. It's user friendly because you don't have to worry about 500, you know, autofocus points to go through, and it's 12 frames a second, so it's going to capture the moment, point blank, period. But at the end of the day, it's still a full frame sensor. It has specs like a 7D, or it has specs like a, you know, a 1DX, and it's a mirrorless camera, and it has more megapixels. So you can see where the world's going with Nikon. I think the Z6 is better. The Z7, even though I would want the 45.7 megapixels, I would not want the XQD card slot on any of these cameras. I would not want a lot of things, and not the price either. So if somebody were to give it to me for free, yeah, I would shoot with the Nikon Z6 or the Z7, but that's not what I have right now. I don't have the cameras in my hand. Don't ask me about the new mirrorless cameras. I'm not planning on getting any. If somebody wants to send me one, that's a different story, but I'm probably not going to get any. I'm going to be talking about the Panasonic new full frame mirrorless camera up next, and stay tuned for more videos, guys.